I'm Dan Drake. Welcome to Front Up on Geno TV Channel 99. Our guest today is Bill Tramposch, the Executive Director of the Nantucket Historical Association. Bill, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Dan.
And what I'd like to talk a little bit about is, when you first came here, which was about 6 years ago?
6 years.
First of all, what brought you to Nantucket, and then
Sure.
We'll go on from there.
Sure, okay. I grew up in New England. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, Monroe, Connecticut, and we were living in New Zealand for 12 years. Peggy and I, before we moved to New Zealand, were married on Nantucket in the 70s at the town building by Justice of the Peace Coffin.
Oh yes, indeed, the town clerk.
Town clerk. So we were married here, and New England, stone walls, maple trees, New England history, literature, it's really part of my blood. So even as much as we loved New Zealand, a friend of mine told me about this job on Nantucket, which when I came for the interview, which was going to be a couple of days, I stayed for a week. I was so enamored of the place. Hadn't been for years. And we accepted the position, and 30 years to the day from our marriage, May 8th, I started my job across the street from the town building where we were married by coincidence.
By coincidence.
So there's something very symmetrical about it, and it's been great. It feels like 2 years I've been here. But.
You came at a time when the Whaling Museum particularly had just undergone a major transformation. The whole NHA really had undergone a significant transformation. When you got here, though, what was the first thing you wanted to change?
Well, actually, that had a lot to do with moving from New Zealand, because in New Zealand we were building a new national museum, the Museum of New Zealand. And I thought, unlike my colleague who left, Frank Milligan, he likes building museums. I had done my dash with that, so I wanted to fill a museum. And what I loved is a kind of tabula rasa aspect of the Museum of Nantucket Historical Association, the opportunity to lay on community programs, to build collaborations, to have all sorts of programs that awaken people's curiosity about the past. I like that a lot more than the bricks and mortar building of museums. So that's there was a lot to do, and we've got the staff to do it.
Did you run into any challenges right in the way in terms of either financial issues or opposition to some of the things that you wanted to do?
Having grown up in a small town in Connecticut, I realized that even thoughts are sometimes opposed before you voice them. But I was surprised. In Nantucket that people live and breathe heritage on this island. So I think the programs we've offered, the initiatives we've started, our interest in preserving our properties in perpetuity have all been greeted with a great deal of resonance from people. There was really nothing in particular, and I have to tell you, one other thing that really surprised me are the number of people who come to support what we do. I thought the support would oftentimes come with all sorts of contingencies and so forth, but people get heritage here, and it makes a huge difference. If we were in Flint, Michigan, for example, it would be very different. In Nantucket, National Historic Landmark, people really understand that. So, not to sound Pollyannish, but I really can't think of one thing that surprised me. I just knew it would be
great.
That's
good.
That's why it feels like 2 years.
I think one of the things that you've done is to try and involve the Nantucket community much more into the NHA and the Whaling Museum in particular. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'd love to, yeah. The community in general, but in particular, there are two fronts in which we're very interested. One of them is school. And the other one is diversity. I'm very worried, as many people are in our field, about the fact that you can run and develop a top-flight museum, but we have a whole generation of kids coming up today who aren't even exposed to history. The curriculum is a mile wide and an inch deep. It doesn't have a lot of substance. We teach to the standards of testing and so forth. So the idea of getting fired up about history is a hard thing for kids to do unless you develop the collaborations with with museums, and that's one front. And we've been developing all sorts of collaborations. We've got Mike Kozort on our board, which is great. We've got Kim Kubish, who spent not one but 2 nights with us in the Whaling Museum recently for a program that's an unforgettable night watch program where we had 78 kids come and spend the night.
All at once?
Oh no, two different
two groups.
Two different
Right.
groups, fourth graders, and we divided each of the 2 groups up into 3 ships, and so the kids would go off onto 3 different voyages, come back and count up how successful they were. They'd learn a lot of history, but they'd have a lot of fun at the same time. That's what we're about. But then they'd spread their mattresses out on the floor in the Great Hall of the Whaling Museum, Gosnell Hall, and they'd go to bed under the whale. And I have to say that's got to be one of these landmark moments for the kids. So that school programs are really important to us, and we have a myriad of them. But the other one that's important is diversity. So every year we do a diversity festival. This year we had 5 languages that we gave tours in. And we had 350 people come from 35 countries for our diversity festival. So that grows every year too. And it's exciting to watch people who didn't think that this was part of them come into the Whaling Museum and understand just how it is part of who they are. And our job is to try to be as welcoming as possible.
This past winter, in the off season, you, for lack of a better term, sort of gussied up the Whaling Museum.
Right.
How has that been received?
Gussied up in
the sense of changing the exhibit somewhat, adding material.
Okay. Well, it's gussied up with the festival. I thought you were talking about Festival of Trees, but the gussied up. We've taken the Candle Factory, which is a National Historic Landmark in its own right. And we've done what museums should do, and that's put a lot of our objects in front of people rather than in storage. The Whaling Museum and the NHA have fully 10% of its collection on display. Shockingly, only 5% is the national average of collections in museums. We're aiming for 15%, but all of our collection's digital, we're pretty close to that right now. So we have digital access. We put up, we hung where the Candle Factory is dripping with objects right now, including an attic, a kind of homage to a Nantucket attic, of which there are many here. We've also taken a part of the Whaling Museum and made it into the Nantucket Corner. A little bit like the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, the piano addition to the Stewart Gardner Museum has a museum living room. So we have a Nantucket Corner that's just all about people sitting, reading, the racks in college where you'd read the newspapers, and on the racks I got one of those, and we put not modern newspapers, but the Inky Mirror fortunately has gone on since the 1820s, so we have old issues of that for people to read. We have access to all of our all of our collections, our library, and just books for people to sit and read, plus a little fireplace in there that's faux, not real. Just to comfort people. And so that's been very successful too, and it's been welcomed by people.
The Athenaeum is another repository of Nantucket history. And how do you collaborate with them?
Yeah, that's exciting. The Athenaeum, we do more of that every year. On one front, we do One Book, One Island every year, which is coming to fruition again this year. The book is being picked. January 26th.
No
Okay, I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed. I keep on saying we should read Moby Dick, but that gets voted down every year. Because everybody's read it probably. But we're on 26th and 27th of January. We're collaborating with the Athenaeum on their Read Out Loud Moby Dick. We're going to go to some of our sites to do that too. Father Mapple in the Quaker Meeting House will be great. That segment. And we also have supported their efforts, and I'm delighted that they've undertaken them to digitize the Inky Mirror, which is finished right now. I'm working on a couple of other things, and Molly and I scheme more and more every year. So it's a natural. I have to say, too, that it's not just the Athenaeum, but it's NPT, it's Mariah Mitchell, it's the Conservation Foundation, and the cultural sensitivity towards collaboration in Nantucket is another really pleasant surprise for me coming on island, because I've usually worked in towns where there's just outright competition. There's good collaboration.
I could tell you some stories from 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm glad I came 6 years ago.
So what's on the docket for the future?
Pretty exciting. We've got, well, we start up our brown bag lunch series every Thursday at noon. Mm-hmm. We do one of 22 brown bag lunches. That starts up again, speaking of a collaboration, it starts up again in February 7th. This week, actually, we have one, our final one of the year. On the 7th of February.
Who's on?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I'm sorry.
Right.
It's high school, the teacher at high school who teaches cooking.
Oh, yes. I know exactly who you mean.
And I apologize in advance. Right. I'm sorry. I thought I had that in my head. Yeah. But we do have Margot Hartman speaking on the 7th and Molly Anderson coming the next week in February. Mm-hmm. We also have a new exhibit coming online in March, which is called Legends. That will be a lot of fun. What are some of the great Nantucket legends that just persist on this island? Mm-hmm. For example, the Tony Sarg serpent. Mm-hmm. Do you know the history of that?
No.
In 1821, a man named Francis Joy spotted what he said was a 100-foot serpent in the offshore. And there was a time when serpents were being spotted pretty regularly all over the place, like especially Gloucester. Mm-hmm. And so Tony Sarg in 1937 thought it would be kind of a hoot to recreate the serpent. He brought it to, he surprised the public. And then the serpent went to Macy's Day Parade as a float, as a balloon. And actually, it was Tony Sarg who started the Macy's Day balloons, an Nantucketer. Mm. So we'll be talking about legends, whether they're true or whether they're false. So that's coming up. Night of Holiday Magic is this Saturday night at 5 o'clock. Please come. It's free, except for non-members. It's only $5 for non-members, but it's so much better to become a member.
No, don't get too commercial. Just quickly, are there any plans for any of your other facilities at this point?
Yeah, actually, we've of course restored Greater Light. Mm-hmm. We're really proud of that. The fire hose cart just got opened last year. We're very much hoping that our next front will be the old jail, and we have some good news for that coming down the line for the restoration of that. And we're ticking off about a site a year, keeping that ever so modest Hadwin House for last, because it's so damn big.
Well, you've got a few years to go to get there.
We do.
To gather the resources and so forth necessary to do it.
But keeping our properties in perpetuity is terribly important for us. We have 21 properties, and we don't have such a huge endowment to be able to do that. We've accepted a lot of properties over the years without endowments, and museums just aren't doing that anymore. So it's time to take care of those key properties.
Any last words that you'd like to leave with us?
Just thank you, and welcome back from your trip, Gino.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill.
Okay, thanks,
Bill
Dan.
Tramposch from the Nantucket Historical Association.
Thanks.